We had Sunday evening. We did with congregation Avat Shalom. We did a joint um, Shavuot event for the first time. We always used to do it with congregation Beth Shalom, the conservative synagogue here in Santa Clarita. And last night or Sunday night, we did it with. It kind of felt like we were cheating on them, but we it was very nice. And Avat Shalom did a phenomenal job. We did not get a lot of you that showed up there, I will tell you. Not many of you wanted to drag yourselves over the hill. But it was a really weird day because, the attack in Boulder earlier that day definitely put some people in the wrong frame of mind. Oh my gosh, we have an old friend who just entered into our establishment. An old friend, an old friend. I didn't say an old person. I said an old friend. Stop it. Stop it, you. Um,
Ooh.
yeah. So yeah, we had Shavuot together, and we did a little study together. But most of it was, and Rick and Addie were there too, so we had a little music together with their cantor, and it was really nice. But again, it did not seem like people wanted to come into Northridge for the event. We're not going to postulate that that's the way it would be if we ever did an event with them again, because if so, we would not do an event with them again. But we'll try it for a holiday that's not Shavuot. But I will tell you that, yeah, we were not in a great frame of mind. I did get a really nice call from I got a really nice call from our congressman, George Whitesides, who called me and basically said, "Look, if there's anything we can do," he had, literally just within minutes or hours, whatever, in 2 hours of the attack in Boulder, he left us a really nice message, and it was nice to hear that he that he cared about it. But yeah, it's clearly a problem, and it's a problem on several levels. Some people have said to me, well, if it can happen in Boulder at a event in a park, that on a street, that it could happen here. Of course it could happen here. It happened here. I mean, there was an attack at the North Valley Jewish Community Center 26 years ago, and somebody went in with a machine gun and literally could have killed dozens of children. Miraculously, none of them were killed. Thousand Oaks, Paul Kessler was killed on the streets. It's not like it hasn't happened here. I mean, don't say it can't. And there was a shooting at a Poway Chabad. I mean, a Poway. I mean, Poway. There's no. That's when I woke up because I was about 6 months after the Pittsburgh shooting, and I thought, well, Pittsburgh. It's not a real big Jewish community, but Squirrel Hill, everybody knows that's a Jewish community. But Poway. I mean, there's no difference between Poway and Santa Clarita. That's when I said, can happen here. Yeah, I guess. I saw the video. I don't know what made me go down that rabbit hole, but I just the other day, probably the Boulder thing made me think about Poway. And I looked at the video or the security camera footage of that guy going into the synagogue. And yeah, a woman was killed, 60-year-old woman, Lori Gilbert Kay was murdered. And yeah, I mean, and the rabbi had part of his hand blown off. But yeah, that one hit me. I mean, it wasn't I mean, we're not Chabad, but I mean, the person who attacked them didn't care that it was Chabad. He didn't attack them because it was a Chabad place. He attacked them because it's the closest synagogue to where he was, and it was a big Chabad. I mean, it wasn't like a tiny storefront Chabad. It was a Chabad that over 20 years had built up a 700 seat sanctuary. That's where it happened. Preschool and a seniors facility. It was quite a facility. So yeah, it's interesting. The governor of Colorado is a Jewish guy, Jared Paulus. No, I think he's. Oh, the mayor might be Jewish too, but the governor of Colorado, Jared Polis. Yeah, he's gay Jewish mayor. I mean, governor of California. I mean, of Colorado. It's amazing.
Practicing?
Yeah, I mean, practicing homosexual or practicing Jew. I don't know. He's practicing both. Oh, he's very good at it. No, it's interesting. I'll show you this guy. He's 43rd governor. You know what's interesting about this dude? A lot of people don't know this. So this is Jared. So he's younger than me. Uh, yeah, but check out who he check out this check out who he was or where he came from. I always thought this was interesting. Look who his mom was. I think she's still alive. Yeah, she is.
Hmm.
Remember this lady? Man, my mom loved this lady. You don't remember this lady? Come on. Come on, friends. This lady. These were her cards, man. Come on. Reverend Lynn, you didn't know Susan Polish Schultz? She would, come on, guys.
I didn't.
These cards were everywhere back. This is his
I know
mom.
about the cards, but I
This,
didn't know
this
there was the
lady, Blue
person
Mountain
behind them.
Arts. Come on.
I'm
Come
sorry.
on. You guys love this stuff.
I
You
love
love
the
this stuff.
cards. I never thought about the person who made them.
Well, yeah, because she never, she didn't go on TV or anything, but this was her
Right.
stuff.
Too
Susan Polish
sappy
Schultz.
for
This is
me.
his mom. This
Too
is his mom.
sappy
I
for
always
me.
kind of identify with this guy because, first of all, my mom loved those cards, man.
Hmm.
She would send these cards to everybody. Yeah, these nice, powerful, empowering, beautiful cards. Anyways, that's his mom. There you go, the governor of Colorado. But yeah, so he had to come out with a statement and, yeah, not a good thing. Oh yeah, no, he didn't. Yeah, I know. The police did. Well, look, I mean, you got to be careful. I mean, you got to make sure you know what you're talking about when you. But the guy got caught right away, and he admitted what he did, so it wasn't like they had to figure it out. But yeah, you got to be. You know, he did. It turned out he wasn't late, but law enforcement always they got to cover themselves. So, anyways, that was a weird Shavuot, a weird last couple of weeks, and everybody's asking me if I'm going to write something about it. Like, I don't. I felt like I've written it so many times. Like, how many times do I have to say the same thing? Which is that we have to protect the Jewish community. We have to protect every community from hate. I'm like, how many times have I had to say that? It's kind of obvious, but yeah, I don't know. I don't really know how many more ways to say it, but it feels like I'm like, how many times? So in the last 5 years too, or 6 years, whatever, 7 years since I think it really kind of started thinking about it more after the JCC shooting was terrible. It was in our backyard, but really started thinking it over the Tree of Life, the Tree of Life Synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. So something's going on. So, well, it's a good segue to the book that we're reading today, the book we're starting today, which is the last book that got into the Bible, according to us, according to the rabbis. They really debated this. They really debated whether this book should have been in the Bible. Now, part of it was because it was a pretty late written book. Like, it was not written until probably 200 BCE. So, you're talking about 150 years, 150 years before the rabbis are debating what's going to be canonized. A little bit before. Daniel's written about 150 BCE. So it's one of the last books, but it's also like, and even when you think about when it was supposed to take place, it's supposed to take place during the time of King Xerxes, which is about 400, BCE, 350 or 370, whatever, about 400 BCE. So even when its setting was late, it also took place, obviously, in Persia. It didn't take place in Israel. But that's okay. I mean, there's other books that don't take place in Israel. They don't have to take place in Israel. I mean, technically, part of the Bible, technically, the Torah books that take place in Egypt, they don't take place in Israel. It doesn't have to take place in Israel. So that's part of it too. But it doesn't. It's not. It's not about necessarily at first every Jew. It's about Jews in Persia. Later on, of course, it becomes kind of about every Jew, but it's not initially really about anything other than the Jews of Persia, which was a big community, but it's not all Jews. It wasn't the Jews of Israel. It wasn't the Jews in Egypt. So, and there were large communities in those countries already by that point. So, um, This is all part of this question of like, is this book really belong? We know that when the rabbis talk about does this make it into the Bible, they're not. This is not a hyperbole. This was not dramatized. It was a real question. And one of the ways that we know that now that we didn't know then, but we've known for the last 80 years, is because it's not in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's the only book of the Bible that we don't have a Dead Sea Scroll on. Now, that's not a coincidence because there's lots of scroll fragments of certain books, right? There'll be 10 different little pieces of Isaiah that we have, or 20 different pieces of Samuel that we'll have from because remember, it wasn't like the Dead Sea Scrolls were like one book of every book of the Bible. There's lots of scrolls and lots of copies. And look, sometimes we kind of extrapolate that because there were so many copies of a book that book was really important because they had a lot of copies of it. But when they have no copies of a book, then we're kind of thinking there's a reason why there's no copies, not one verse from the book of Esther. And so, yes, it's the only book of the Bible that's not. There's also interesting fact that there's different versions of Esther, meaning that the Septuagint has a completely different version of this. It's not even like a little different. It's completely different. And so for that, people also say, well, there seems to be divergent versions of this, right? There's not even consistent ways of having copies of this, which not necessarily a proof that it was maybe not going to make it, but definitely there's something going on here. There's something going on with this book. And the thing that people point to the most when it comes to this is that there's no mention of God in this book. God's not mentioned. God's name isn't mentioned. God doesn't do anything in this book. Now, look, there's books of the Bible where God really doesn't do anything, right? The book of Ruth, for example. But at least Ruth says, your God will be my God. At least there's like some kind of, and there's no mention of God here. Now, what's interesting about that is not, of course, just that, like, oh, why is it in the Bible if it doesn't seem to really be about God? Okay, well, as we said, there's other books that don't really seem to be. I mean, we just read Song of Songs. That's not really a book about God. I mean, some people say it's all about God, but it doesn't mention God. Could be not about God, could be erotic poetry. But what Esther does, at least according to some people, is it intentionally doesn't mention God. Why? Because it's not meant to be taken seriously. It's meant to be a farce. And by including God's name in it, potentially is going to be sacrilegious. It'll be blasphemous to talk about God in a book that is a fantasy. Now, here's the problem. After 2,000 years of it being in our Bible, there are many people who say it's not a fantasy, it's absolutely historical fact. So in the Orthodox world, for example, this story is seen as a historical fact that it took place. Now, the only person in this story that we're about to read that is historically verifiable is Ahasuerus, the king. Not one other person who's mentioned in this book. We have any physical, material, archaeological evidence from anywhere that they existed. None of these people. None of them. Not Vashti, not Esther, not Mordecai, not Haman. None of the many counselors and eunuchs that are mentioned by name we have any reference to. So it seems as though there actually might have been an intention of not having this book be taken seriously. And yet, of course, it is taken seriously. Now, that by saying taken seriously, we can take it seriously from the standpoint of it has a tremendously important lesson to teach us. And I would argue that of all the books of the Bible, it actually might be the most true, especially given the circumstances that we're in right now, thinking about anti-Semitism. It is definitely a topical book, and it's one that is very important. But actually saying that this is verifiably factual, it may have been intended never to be seen as verifiably factual, maybe intentionally not, to set up a historical satire that's meant to be funny, but also have a lesson in it. And we still have that. Some of the greatest satire we have, it was funny, but it also was really serious. I mean, people who watch The Great Dictator now today, we forget that that movie was came out while people were dealing with the rise of Adolf Hitler. And to make fun of him in a way that was like, I mean, today we just think, oh wow, that's really amazing that Charles, but that was an act of political, there was he could have been killed for doing something like that by someone who loved Hitler who would have assassinated him. That's a serious thing, but it was also very funny in a way, obviously. We're going to get to that. Yeah, you're jumping ahead, but Mike said her name is not Esther. It's actually Hadassah. Yeah, we're going to read, and again, we're going to read this book the way we don't normally read it on Purim, where we're not going to be shouting out Haman's name every time. You can do it once or twice just to get it out of your system, but we're going to actually read it as a book, as literature. And some people have like commented on the literary aspects of it. They've talked about, again, the composition, the authorship. We don't really know much about it, though again, we believe it's fairly late authorship in that there's words in it that are clearly not Hebrew words. Not that they had to be Hebrew words, from early standpoint, but the earlier books of the Bible really don't have what we call Aramisms, which are Aramaic words. They don't have, as this book has, lots of Persian words. Now, you'd expect this book to have Persian words because it takes place in Persia. So there's going to be a lot of Persian words in it. But, when we get to later books of the Bible, like the book of Daniel, we have whole sections of Daniel that are in Aramaic. This book, for the most part, has, again, the Persian influence that you'd expect it to have. And then at the same time, there isn't a lot in this book that we would say, yeah, but this wasn't written by a Jewish person. So we do believe this was written by Jewish people. I'm not going to give you yet you can read them, but you can read the theories of why this was written by a Jewish person and why this even was done in the first place, this book. But just, I want to get into it. I want to start reading it. And I want to also tell you that so much of our connection to this book is through the holiday of Purim that we don't really think about necessarily the book as a whole, and we don't oftentimes read it in English with an actual attention to what's happening. So again, the setting for this book, there was a real Hashverosh, there was a real Xerxes, there was a real King Xerxes. He was an important king of Persia. It's part of a dynasty that lasted a few hundred years that was very powerful. That at one point, again, if it wasn't for the Battle of Thermopylae, if it wasn't for the 300, if it wasn't for the Greeks, they would have overrun all of Europe. Now, of course, the modern version of that story is, kind of taken as like they were Middle Eastern people that were trying to overrun Europe. Of course, they weren't exactly that. They were the Persian Empire at the time. The Achaemenid dynasty was Aryan, technically Caucasian, but yeah, in the movies and in the fantasy of kind of like the last 30 years or so, it became a metaphor for the culture clash between the Arab world or the Muslim world and the Western world. It was definitely not that in those days, and wasn't really seen necessarily like that by people because the Persians were not Muslim, they were not Christian, they were not even Jewish, though they had a lot of Jews that lived in their empire. They were Zoroastrian. They were Zoroastrian peoples who, according to what we know, worshipped in a kind of way that, look, the Greeks were pagan at that time. They were worshiping Zeus and all the pantheon of Olympian gods, and the Zoroastrians were closer to monotheistic religion than they were. Not that there's a big issue there, but I mean, that's the truth. the other thing is that the Persians didn't just rule from Persia. They had an empire, as we're going to see, according to this, that went from India all the way to Nubia during this time, which is again from Africa all the way to India. Um, but they ruled with, as an empire did, with different provinces, as we're going to see, 127 of them. And in those provinces, there was oftentimes a lot of autonomy. Whereas, again, what we know about the land of Israel during this time, we called Judah. They let the Judeans build the temple, right? They let our ancestors rebuild the temple about 150 years before Xerxes. We have Cyrus the Great, who the Bible calls the Messiah. They call King Koresh the Messiah because he let them build the temple. And the Persians did that all over the place. They were in some ways more tolerant than some of, the Greco-Roman emperors who, Alexander the Great, who would demand a statue of himself in the temples. But the Persians are ruling through provinces, and there were Greek provinces that had already given over their authority to the Persian Empire during the time of the battles of Marathon and Thermopylae, the Greek Persian wars. There were already Persian provinces in Greece that were fine. They were fine with the Persian authority. But then, of course, there were other people who didn't like the Persians, like the Athenians and the Spartans, who decided they don't want to be part of the Persian Empire. The Jews were. And during that time, we were okay with it. We were okay with it. We were fine with the Persian Empire. Well, the Persian Empire itself lasts for a long time. This dynasty lasts from about 450 to about 300, because that's when Alexander the Great came and conquered everything. So it's not that long. There's about 5 or 6 kings, including Xerxes, and there was another Xerxes, and there was an Artaxerxes, and there was Darius. There's kings that you hear about. These kings of this dynasty were very powerful, and for the most part, very tolerant and very supportive of the Jewish community. And that's why what's interesting, of course, today, with Iran being Israel's greatest enemy, is that's historically not the case. Iran was actually traditionally, or Persia at least, was an ally and was a helper for Israel. And there are people in Israel today who hope that once the Persian Empire, once the Iranian government falls, that the new government there will be a very pro-Israel government. The Shah's government was. Up until 1979, Israel and Persia, or Iran, were friends. So it's possible. There are a lot of people in Israel who hope that that will happen again. We don't know. But I will tell you that this story, as it exists, there is very little factual basis for anything you're about to hear. So when people say, well, what about this? What about that? We just don't have any evidence for it. However, again, some would argue that this is the most true story in the Bible for what it teaches us about anti-Semitism and about how fragile Jewish existence was for most of the last 2,000 years. So let's jump in. Let's take a look. Yeah.
It happened in the
No,
days
no,
of.
one second, Rosemary.
Sure.
Yeah. Different. How's it viewed by Jews or viewed by? So we don't normally read the Septuagint version of Esther. So I'll just show you real quick. I mean, before we jump into it, it's not going to necessarily make as much sense. But when we look at the Greek version, and again, this version, it's interesting because the church didn't really know what to do with the Greek. Like, it's interesting because they knew that there was a Greek version of it. They knew there was another version of it, but they really did, especially like in the King James, they really did defer to the Hebrew version of it. The Septuagint, even though it was, I mean, the Septuagint, remember, was written by Jews. It wasn't written by Greek Christians. It was written by Jews, and then the Greek Christians read it because it was written in their language. But it's almost as if the even the church wasn't really sure what to do with it. Well, they weren't sure what to do with the Greek editions, and so they are kept in the Apocrypha. So if you go into the Catholic Apocrypha, they're there, um, and so um, what's interesting is that here I'll just show you this real quick. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But what's interesting about it is that, like, normally if you think there's additions to a book, like, they're at the beginning or maybe at the end, it's not the case here. It says, in the Septuagint, the chapters are interspersed, which means there's some in the middle, some in the end, some in the beginning. They're all over the place, right? There's little pieces in there. So it's used in the Catholic Bible translations based primarily on the Vulgate, which is the Latin version. Uh, and the chapters are numbered up to 16 in that, right? So, um, so it says, most modern Catholic translations do. Um, the numbering system for the editions therefore differs with each translation. Uh, so some of the some so the Catholic editions. So these are all Catholic editions. The Revised Standard Catholic Edition, obviously the New American Bible, and the New Revised Standard. I use the New American. If I'm using a Catholic tradition, I use this New American one. Um, but even in those translations, they do different things with it. But if you open up a NIV or RSV Bible, it's our Esther. It's exactly the same. There'll usually be notes. Sometimes there'll be additions. Well, there'll be a note. What does yours do, Reverend Lynn? They just took it out, but they kept it. Oh, so you can find it. Uh, yeah, it's kind of interesting. So, I guess it goes back to this. And it's a great question because, again, I don't know. Esther often tells us a lot about the person who reads it, not just the person who wrote it or the people who decided what was canonized. Here's the key. It says the canonicity of these Greek editions has been subject to scholarly disagreement practically since their first appearance in the Septuagint. Martin Luther, being perhaps the most vocal Reformation era critic of the work, considered even the original Hebrew version to be of very doubtful value. Wow, right? So Martin Luther, right, kind of the guy of the Reformation, right? He really didn't care for the whole book. It's like not just the additions. I don't really care for this. Look, I mean, there are like I said, there are ways of looking at this book which tell us more about the people who read it than the person who you know it's written about or the person who wrote it. And so it's a very interesting Rorschach test on people of what they think about Esther. What do they make of Esther, and how do they read it, and how do they understand it? Right? How are they gonna contextualize Esther? So let's take a look at this book, and I think again, as women have taken a larger role within the Jewish community, it's not necessarily that Esther is like a more popular character. I don't think Esther ever was not a popular character. If you look at how many Jewish women throughout history have been named Esther, it's very hard to imagine that Esther was never important. And I don't think that necessarily women look at Esther as necessarily like we all need to be like Esther, but I do think that people have in the modern world have kind of realized that here you have a book where the hero of the book is a woman. It's named after a woman, and there are definitely things that we can learn about from this that I think maybe tell us a little bit about feminism, tell us a little bit about how women have asserted themselves traditionally and how they've asserted themselves today. And so, I mean, I see it. I don't. I'm not gonna. I mean, it's not my job to do that, but it is definitely my job to let people see it. So let's see it, Rosemary. If one of our great women of our modern era will take us through Esther.
It happened in the days of Ahasuerus that Ahasuerus, who reigned over 127 provinces, from India to Nubia. In those days, when King Ahasuerus occupied the royal throne in the fortress Shushan, in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all the officials and courtiers, the administration of Persia and Media, the nobles and the governors of the provinces in his service.
Yeah. So he calls together a big party. Going to have a big party in the third year of his reign. And you can see that a couple of things. Number one, again, he ruled 127 provinces. That is actually true, that there were, I don't know that necessarily at any given point there necessarily were 127, but there were many, many provinces. And they really did go from India to Africa and went all the way through to Asia, Turkey, Israel, all those countries, all the way up through, as he said, all the way up to Greece. Now, in the north. Um, and again, he had these governors that ruled over those areas. So, assumedly, this party he's given is bringing together not only the people in the kingdom, and one of the other things we learned is that this city of Shushan, of Susa, was one of their capitals. It wasn't the only capital; it was one of their capitals. And so when he had this party in Shushan, um, that was one of his main cities of the empire, and that again at the time they still referred to it as Persia and Media, um, Madai in Hebrew. And the Medians and Persians were like a unified empire of Persian people and Median people who were both in modern day Iran. We don't really call them Medians anymore, but at that point, the Medes and the Persians were kind of the unified peoples that controlled that area, ruled out of that area, but again controlled so much of the known world at that time of the world that historians dealt with, right? Because the Greeks were amazed at how much the Persians had done, and of course they were the succeeding empire. They're the ones who destroyed the Persian Empire. I mean, Alexander the Great overran these cities of Shusha and Ecbatana. He took the capitals from the Persians and he made them his capitals. He made them his capitals in the east, Persepolis. Those places became his eastern his eastern fortresses. So like the Greeks were appreciative and admiring of what the Persians had done before them. And that's why when they conquered them, they were very proud of what they had done. They'd beaten a vast empire. Here we go.
For no fewer than 180 days, he displayed the vast riches of his kingdom and the splendid glory of his majesty. At the end of this period, the king gave a banquet for 7 days in the court of the king's palace garden for all the people who lived in the fortress Shushan, high and low alike.
So he has a big party, right? He has this big banquet for everybody who's his officials, but then he has a big party for everyone who lives in the kingdom. It says all people, high and low alike. Um, so that's after a year, half a year of partying. He has a final party. He has a week long party in the capital he opens up the doors to the rest of the population. We have no historical record of the Persians ever doing this. They were very they had beautiful palaces. They had great parties that we know of, but they didn't let the common person into their parties. But again, okay, so this is a special thing we could say, whatever. But this party is a party on top of the party. He'd been partying for half a year, 180 days, and now he has one more final party, 7 day party. Now, one of the things we know about the Persians is that they did like to party. That was true. That's true. Persians loved to party. They had parties you wouldn't believe, and they drank like crazy. And we're going to see they drank like crazy. And we found their rhytons. We found their drinking goblets. They're huge. They're enormous drinking goblets we found all over the Persian Empire. They this is real. I mean, they did like to party. It's ironic, of course, because today the modern nation of Iran does everything they can to stop people from drinking and partying. But the Persians themselves, up until that time, up until the 70s really liked to party. And they do too. Here in LA, the Persian community loves to party. If you ever want to go to a Persian wedding or a Persian bar mitzvah, you'll start eating at 10 o'clock at night. But that's after you've already had hors d'oeuvres for the previous 3 or 4 hours. And then you'll be dancing and kind of expected to be there until pretty much the morning. So they know how to party even today. And that's Jews, Jewish Persians, a lot of them here in LA, but also the other Persians who wanted to get out of that eventual hell that they created for the theocracy in Iran. So, big party for everybody. After a long party, one more party. And here's the definition of like what kind of stuff they did.
There were hangings of white cotton and blue wool, caught up by cords of fine linen and purple wool to silver rods and alabaster columns. And there were couches of gold and silver on a pavement of marble, alabaster, mother of pearl, and mosaics. Royal wine was served in abundance, as befits a king, in golden beakers, beakers of varied design.
And we found those. Those we have found. So I mean, look, I didn't say it was all made up. I mean, the stuff, the design and the descriptions of the these beakers, these right, they're called rhytons. They're what? Yeah, I'm going to turn up Rosemary a little bit. Mike, are you there? Can you turn it up a little bit inside here, inside the sanctuary? Turn up the sanctuary volume. You don't have to shout, Rosemary. We're going to turn you up a little bit louder in here. That's better. It's not you. It's the volume. All right. So they're drinking out of those golden beakers. They're drinking out of they're called clay zahav. Just here, I'll just show you one real quick because you'll see them in the museums. And every time I see one, they're so obvious. They're so obviously Persian. And whenever I see them, I think of Esther. I think of what kinds of stuff they were drinking out of. Here, I'll just show you real quick. These are the rhytons. These people knew how to party. And this is, again, this was what they'd throw their drinks into. Look at this. Beautiful, right? Oftentimes like a carved animal on it. And yep, they knew how to drink. And they drank out of beautiful, beautiful cups. So here's what they did.
And the rule for the drinking was no restrictions, for the king had given orders to every palace steward to comply with each man's wishes.
That's right. So there was no restrictions, right? No
No limit.
restrictions on drinking.
Open bar.
An open bar. Yep. There's ain't and the rule was no rules. That's an awesome line. That's a great
What I
line.
would have
No
said.
rule. No rule. All right.
In addition, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for women in the royal palace of King Ahasuerus. On the seventh day, when the king was merry with wine, he ordered Mehuman, Bizeta, Harbona, Bigta, Abagtha, Zetar, and Carcas, the 7 eunuchs in attendance on King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing a royal diadem to display her beauty to the peoples and the officials, for she was a beautiful woman.
Yeah. So a couple things there. Vashti, we have no version of, we know Xerxes' wife's name. Armitsas. She was not, it's not even close to Vashti. She was not, she was, from what we know, actually, probably a pretty strong woman. We don't know a lot about the harem that he maintained, that Xerxes factually maintained. But according to what we know about Persian and later, I mean, a lot of it's kind of imagined because the last harems that we knew about were the Turks. So some of it is kind of like what they did, but we don't know for sure because we don't have a lot of descriptions of Persian. We have descriptions of Persian court life, but the Persians are actually pretty conservative when they describe the sexual stuff that went on. And again, not that the harem descriptions in the Turkish descriptions are that graphic. They're not. I mean, people want them to be, but they're not. Um, I mean, the West was fascinated by this. But one of the things that we do know about is the Persians did maintain eunuchs. They maintained eunuchs to oversee the harem, but they also seem, as you can see, to be not just in the harem, but actually the people that the king trusts. They're part of his advisors, part of his circle of advisors. So you could say that they had proved their ultimate loyalty to the king by going through this horrific, mutilation of their bodies. But of course, they've now shown that they've proven their loyalty. They can be trusted around the women, but they also have basically said by becoming eunuchs, we don't, not only are we not going to take advantage, assumedly not take advantage of your women, but we have no dynasty that we're going to establish when you know, we're less likely to kill you because it's not like we're going to make our son king and we're going to have a dynasty after. And that happened in Persia. I mean, there were dynasties. I mean, within the Achaemenid dynasty, there was a pretender who took power by assassinating the other king, the king. So this stuff did happen, and so this is a kind of in the background here is the court intrigue and the fact that eunuchs were given tremendous power and access in the Persian court, and it wasn't just because of the harem. I mean, that was part of it. I'm saying it's not part of it, but a lot of it had to do with the fact that they had built up this trust with the king, and they were relied on. And you can see these people were the people who had closest access to him. So this is the scene, right? As they ask for Queen Vashti to be brought. Look, again, that's not her name in the Persian records that we know. Is it based on the woman who really was married to him? There's not a lot of overlap, at least. Let's finish Vashti's story and then we'll come back to that because her story is an interesting story. It is definitely a story in Midrash. There's a lot about Vashti in Midrash, and there's a lot about Vashti in modern Midrash. All right, so bring her out, right?
But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. The king was greatly incensed, and his fury burned within him. Then the king consulted the sages, learned in procedure, for it was the royal practice to turn to all who were versed in law and precedent. His closest advisors were Karshena, Shetar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 ministers of Persia and Media who had access to the royal presence and occupied the first place in the kingdom.
Yeah, and we don't have any record of these people. That's why I said the people are mentioned, the people are named here, and we don't have records of them. So again, it doesn't mean that, like, somebody intended for these names to be there. And some people say they're symbolic names. Some people say they're plays on Persian words. The point is that the story seems as though like it's built up around like real people, around individuals. It's built up where there's characters. It's not just like some people imagine the story to be like the 4 people that are the heroes of the story, but there are other people here. There's other people mentioned. The story is very fleshed out. We just tend to kind of simplify it when we do a skit, a Purim spiel. We don't have, well, I guess you could you could have 7 guys and the other 7 guys. There's a lot of roles for people to play just to stand in the background, like a Christmas pageant where somebody gets to be a tree. But yeah, these guys don't have any talking lines, but they are mentioned and they could be verified, but they're not. There's no evidence that these people lived. But the king would have advisors, and that is true. The king would have advisors, and like any king, they have advisors who help him understand the law. That's what it says happens here. Again, it's a setup. I mean, there's a setup here.
What, he asked, shall be done according to law to Queen Vashti for failing to obey the command of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the eunuchs? Thereupon Memucan declared in the presence of the king and the ministers, Queen Vashti has committed an offense not only against your majesty, but also against all the officials and against all the peoples in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will make all wives despise their husbands, as they reflect that King Ahasuerus himself ordered Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the ladies of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will cite it to all your majesty's officials, and there will be no end of scorn and provocation. If it please your majesty, let a royal edict be issued by you, and let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be abrogated, that Vashti shall never enter the presence of King Ahasuerus, and let your majesty bestow her royal state upon another who is more worthy than she. Then will the judgment executed by your majesty resound throughout your realm, vast though it is, and all wives will treat their husbands with respect, high and low alike.
Yeah. So this Memucan, who we don't know anything about because we were just introduced to him and we don't really know who he is, though he also exists in the midrash of who he was and what's his backstory. But yeah, he says if we don't do something right now, if we don't nip this in the bud, we're going to have women all over the place not listening to their husbands. It sets a really bad precedent. That's what he said. So that's what he says, is that women will get out of line if we don't do something here. This isn't just your wife, it's every wife can do this. So it's very interesting because people forget that that's part of the argument that's made. It's not just that Vashti's out of line, it's that she's going to make every woman get out of line. It's a pretty wild thing to think about because, yeah. So Vashti is not only symbolic, as Reverend Lynn said, she's also, the rabbis kind of imagine. Well, let's finish the Vashti. Let's get to the end of Vashti before I tell you the midrash on this. Yeah.
The proposal was approved by the king and the ministers, and the king did as Memucan proposed. Dispatches were sent to all the provinces of the king, to every province in its own script, and to every nation in its own language, that every man should wield authority in his home and speak the language of his own people.
Yeah. That's the end of chapter one. And it's a weird one because it doesn't really say what happens to Vashti. Now, so we're going to read a little bit more before I get to this, but um, Vashti is thrown out. Doesn't say she's killed. I want to make that clear. Doesn't say she's going to be executed, but it says that she can never enter the presence of King Ahasuerus again. Doesn't even say that she's thrown out of the kingdom. It just says she's not allowed to come in front of him anymore.
It reminds me
That's
of
real
Henry
important.
VIII and
What?
reminds me of Henry VIII and his estranged wife.
Yes. In this case, though, it doesn't say he executed them.
The one that wasn't executed, the
Oh,
first one.
oh, you're talking about Catherine.
Yes.
Yeah, Catherine, he doesn't execute her.
Right.
Probably because she was Spanish. He didn't want to start another war by
Didn't want to
killing.
start a war with Spain.
Yeah, but she had legitimate power, and he never really married anyone with that kind of political power. I mean, he had married women who were wealthy. He married for their money, but he didn't marry anybody for their political power ever again. But yeah, she's punished, so she sends a message to everybody else, right? Um, Well, we really don't know what happens to her. And so there are midrashim that she's executed. There are midrashim that she is banished and leaves and goes to another place, marries another king. There are a lot of things about Vashti that make us kind of like what's really going on here. Now, first of all, she is symbolic, as Reverend Lynn said. There's something going on here that she's a symbolic woman. She's very important in the story, even though she exits in the first chapter, because she sets the tone for what's really going on here, which is Esther is always worried about being the next Vashti, right? She knows this has established that there is a woman who's already been thrown out or killed or gotten rid of. So this is an issue, right? This we've established that this could happen, right? In the story. If you don't know anything about the Persians, you know that this could happen. It happened to this Vashti lady. The story tells us that. So that's really important. But the rabbis don't know really what to make of her because on one hand, they don't want women to, get out of line. They know that. I mean, they don't want to encourage that. But on the other hand, there's something really noble about what she just did because she didn't want to be humiliated. She didn't want to come out. Now, the rabbis say that when he asks for her to come out in front of everybody, that she's supposed to come out naked. Now, it doesn't say that. That's not what he said, right? He said she's coming out wearing the royal diadem. The rabbis interpret that to mean, and that's all she wore or was going to wear. She didn't do it, right? But the Torah, literally, the Bible story actually just says to display her beauty, which again, the rabbis interpret to mean, well, she's going to display her beauty. She's going to display all her beauty. Um, and by the way, the Bible itself says she's a beautiful woman. There's no question she's a beautiful. She just says she was a beautiful woman. Now,
Were Persian women customarily veiled at that time?
interesting question, right? Would a Persian woman now? It's very likely, though, that Vashti was not seen by anybody other than the eunuchs, right? That the only person who would see her would be her husband. That may or may not be the case, right? Because there were probably Persian women or Persian noble women who were seen, right? We don't really know because the descriptions that we have or let me put it this way, the artwork that we have doesn't depict them. It depicts the men. It does not depict the women.
That tells you something in itself.
Yeah. So the Persians were definitely they were not known for being egalitarian in their treatment of women. That being said, there were definitely women that were powerful and they exercised their power in sometimes fairly cruel ways. Um, you can read about some of the Persian court intrigue that the women were involved with, which oftentimes had to do with, getting rid of people who were trying to exert power against them. Um, and so there's a lot of Persian court tales about women who are behind the scenes doing stuff, but whether they were veiled or not, they weren't being they had to use their power. They had to exercise their power behind the scenes, which 100% is the story of Esther. That's like the most important part of what Esther does. But it did differ from other kingdoms where women had more front and center, visible places of where people would see them and would be inspired by them or be fearful of them, but they saw them. But it does not seem like Persian noble women were seen by anybody. Um, it doesn't mean that they don't have power. It just means that you don't see them and you don't see how they exercise it out in the open. Um, but again, the rabbis are having to deal with this now. And so one of the things that they take away from this is that she had some type of nobility to her. And so what do the rabbis say? That she's actually the daughter of King Nebuchadnezzar. And there's no way she'd be 150 years old if she was the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar. But they like the idea that she was from that court, that she was from the Babylonian court, and that that in their minds, and again, not thinking about necessarily the historical reality of it, but they just like the idea that this woman came from somewhere special, that she had no an inherent nobility to her already, that she didn't want to be treated like, a prostitute to some extent because she was a queen by birth, not by marriage, but by birth. The rabbis also liked it because they wanted Nebuchadnezzar's descendants to get, you know, a little comeuppance too. So by Vashti being punished, even though she didn't do anything wrong per se, because the rabbis recognized that she was right in saying that she didn't want to come out there and humiliate herself, they kind of they kind of allow her to be punished in the text by saying, but she's King Nebuchadnezzar's daughter, so she's got to get punished. Those people have to be punished. So that was kind of their way of almost, in some ways, explaining why she had such courage, and at the same time, why she deserves, not by her own actions, but by her background, why she deserves to be punished. Because they recognize that this is not right. And if this is how Esther is going to come to power, it's almost like saying, okay, it's a bad system. And they also, of course, don't really want to bash the Persians because they kind of like the Persians. And so they all of these things are going on in the writers' minds, and then later on in the rabbinic minds, because when the Midrash was written, we were still like the Persians. The Persians were still our, if you will, they were our patrons. They were the people that were keeping us alive, especially once the Romans had become, very antagonistic to us. That's where the Talmud was written. It was written in the Persian Empire. So it was written under Zoroastrians, still in power. The Zoroastrians have been in power now for, it's not the same dynasty as the Achaemenid dynasty. It's the Sasanian dynasty. It's a different dynasty. They're still practicing, I wouldn't say the same form of Zoroastrianism, but they're still Zoroastrian. They're still within that religion. There's only like 100,000 Zoroastrians left. But in those days, their empire and their religion lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. So we don't know much about her, but the rabbis imagined that she was a pretty powerful lady in her own right. All right, so she's gone, out of sight, out of mind, maybe maybe she's dead. We don't know. But look what happens.
Sometime afterward, when the anger of King Ahasuerus subsided, he thought of Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. The king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for your majesty. Let your majesty appoint officers in every province of your realm to assemble all the beautiful young virgins at the fortress Shushan in the harem under the supervision of Haga, the king's eunuch, guardian of the women. Let them be provided with their cosmetics. And let the maiden who pleases your majesty be queen instead of Vashti." The proposal pleased the king, and he acted upon it.
Yeah. And so this is the very famous beauty pageant scene, right? Set up, which is that this is a replacement for Vashti. So something happened to the extent that Vashti can't be brought back, which is why some people say she was dead or she was exiled. Or again, in kind of the Persian, the way the story kind of sets it up, is he can't undo what he did. He decreed she can never come back, and he can't change that. Now, again, we don't know that that's the case in Persia, where they passed a law and said, well, we can never change that law. I mean, it seems ridiculous, and there's no proof that that existed in Persia. There's no evidence that the Persians had a rule that said once we pass a law, we can never change it again. It's ridiculous to think, and there is no evidence of that. In this book, that is the operation, that's the operating legal situation here. It's important from the beginning until the end that the Persians, at least in this historical fiction, once they pass a law, they can't undo the law. It's been passed, can't change it. That's important for the whole story. And so in this case, how do we fix what we had done? By having a beauty pageant and pick a new queen. That way we'll have a replacement for Vashti. And he liked the idea. Of course, he liked the idea. He gets all these women, uh, and originally it says that they're from all over the realm. They're all over, from Africa to India. He gets all women from all around the world to be his world, most of the world, known world at that time. He gets to pick out the most beautiful women, and they get their beauty stuff with them. They get to have all their cosmetics with them. So that's interesting too. That they throw in that they get to have their own stuff with them that they wanted. Which, by the way, was like maybe a woman in Egypt put on certain cosmetics, and a woman in India put on a different kind of cosmetics. So they each get their own cosmetics. Interesting. So he likes it. And here's this very important part of this story.
In the fortress Shushan lived a Jew by the name of Mordecai, son of Yair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite. Kish had been exiled from Jerusalem in the group that was carried into exile along with King Jeconiah of Judah, which had been driven into exile by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon.
So this means he was part of the Babylonian exile, not the very last parts of it, which were when King Zedekiah, but the older brother, Coniah or Jeconiah, when he got exiled in his exile. So remember, there were different phases of the exiles of kings that are given a chance to rule by King Nebuchadnezzar, and then he gets rid of them. He gets rid of them, and the last one's Zedekiah. That's when he says, "No more Jewish kings, but no more temple." But according to this, Mordecai's family comes over in that wave, not the earliest wave, but like a middle wave of exiles, and then he comes over, uh, the family. So Kish, right, is the guy who gets exiled. Then he has a son named Shimei, and he has a son named Yair, and then Mordecai. So this is like 4 generations after. That's a possibility, right? That's would make sense. That would line up that if he was exiled in about 500, and this is about four, and like 350, it's about 150 years later. It's 4 generations later. Makes sense. By the way, it tells us that by this point, these Jews have lived in Persia for 4 generations. Interesting. That's about how long I'd say most, but Jewish kids today, right? So like Pauline, your kids, well, on one side, they're only first generation. They're only first generation Americans. They're unusual in that sense that you're. But on your side, it goes back about there'd be about fourth generation American, right? Yeah. So
Pippin
they're
is
not,
fourth generation American on the
what was
Jewish
that?
side. I said my granddaughter Pippin is fourth generation on the Jewish side.
Yeah. So this is about how long these people have lived here. They've gotten acclimated, right? They're
Mhm.
starting to act kind of Persian, I would assume. They've been here for a few generations. They're not speaking Hebrew anymore. They're probably speaking Persian. That's what Mordecai is living. He's living a fourth generation diaspora experience, which I always tell people he was not from Israel. His great grandfather was from Israel. His great great grandfather was from Israel. Right? His grandfather, again, these people had adapted, and they had adapted, though. They had adapted, and again, he's from the tribe of Benjamin, which is the same tribe as King Saul, right? That little tribe where Jerusalem is. So they were from the not the tribe of Judah, but that tribe that had kind of been subsumed by Judah by the period of the exile. Benjamin had been kind of subsumed by Judah, and uh, but they can trace their ancestry back to King Saul. That's an important connection, by the way. The rabbis like to remind us that Esther and Mordecai were descendants of King Saul, and through them, back through King Saul, back to Rachel. So Benjamin, right, and Joseph are the sons of Rachel. They're Rachel's sons. So this is a little bit of the you know, this is a little bit of kind of the mentality that they have, that they're Rachel. We don't want to say they're the tribes that descended from Rachel, and Benjamin was one of them. And of course, King Saul. And the rabbis do connect Esther back to her ancestor Rachel and back to her ancestor King Saul. There's pieces of them that they see in her, and the rabbis see in her some of those qualities that they had. Um, yeah, so let's read about the lady.
He was foster father to Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The maiden was shapely and beautiful, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her as his own daughter.
Yeah, that's important because, there's this kind of almost like, could Mordecai have married her idea, which exists. The traditional understanding was that it was definitely a father daughter type situation. Um, but it says that she was bat dodo. Her cut his the, they don't we don't have a Hebrew word for cousin. So it's ben dode or bat dode. That's your cousin, the son or daughter of your uncle. Dode is your uncle, right? So she's his cousin. Totally legitimate for him to be married to her. Again, there might have been an age difference, an age gap such that he takes her um, more as a daughter, as a father daughter relationship, but that's not necessarily the case. And people have pointed that out. Um, but it does say that when her father and mother died, he took her. The Hebrew says he took her. There's no Hebrew word for adopted, by the way, in the ancient Hebrew, right? Biblical Hebrew. He took her, lakach Mordechai lo lebat, to be his daughter, to be his daughter. Okay, so it seems as though the relationship was more like that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that legally they couldn't have been married. As a matter of fact, most marriages in the ancient Jewish world up until about 150 years ago were between cousins. There's no issue with them being necessarily married. Okay. Maybe they didn't have that relationship, but they could have. And that's the important thing to remember. As Mike said, we forget that Esther was not her name, at least not her birth name. Her name was Hadassah, which means myrtle. Hadassah is the myrtle plant, myrtle bush tree. She's got a Hebrew name, Hadassah. Esther is not a Jewish name. It's a Jewish name today because very few people are named Hadassah. There are a lot more people named Esther. There's a lot more Jews named Esther than Hadassah. It's not that there aren't. I know Hadassahs, but I also know a lot more Esthers. And that's been the case for hundreds of years, actually thousands of years. What's interesting again is that Esther is the Persian name. So she had two names. She had a Hebrew name and she had a Persian name, just like us. Many of us have a English name and we have a Hebrew name. She had that. She had an English name, a Hebrew name and a Persian name. It's very interesting. And Persians had this custom for a long time and still do. Persians will oftentimes have a very Persian name, like Reza or Marjun or Syama, whatever. I think of the people that I know, some of the people I know, and they have a Hebrew name. That's a biblical Hebrew name. Yes, Pauline. Mm-hmm.
So, and honestly, Hadassah, I mean, if you think of nicknames, Asa, Oster, I mean, the E-S.
You think it sounds close?
I somehow, we might not be connected.
The name?
The sound so different, but in the language that they have, maybe the sound is close. So that could just be a nickname.
Well, so if you think Hadassah and Esther are close, it's possible. They both have an S sound. They both have an kind of a duh, tuh sound. Yes. The issue though is so Hadassah is a name. So Hadassah is based on the myrtle, and it's mentioned in the Bible. It's actually Hadassah is part of the Hadassah is part of the lulav, right? We put a Hadassah branch in our lulav and we shake it at Sukkot. But here's the thing: the name Esther is the most Persian name you could get. It's the name Ishtar. It's not just Persian; it's a Persian goddess, Ishtar, Venus, the goddess of beauty. Her name in Persian is Venus. Now, she's a beautiful woman, of course. What a great name for her. But understand that the name Esther is based on a totally pagan name. Guess what? So is Mordechai. Mordechai is the name Marduk. And so Marduk and Ishtar are Babylonian and then Persian gods and goddesses. They're completely pagan names. Completely, not even close to being Jewish. It's weird because, again, Mordechai becomes a totally legitimate Jewish name as well. So many Mordechais, but it's not based on Hebrew. Not only is it not based on Hebrew, it's based on a pagan god. Look, the reality is, I've pointed this out before. The name Moshe, my Hebrew name, Moses, is based on a pagan god. We don't know which one because the Bible conveniently excised it so we wouldn't know. But Moses' name wasn't Moses, it wasn't Moshe. It was Ramoshe or Tutmoshe. We know it. There was a God's name before it and it got cut. He cut it. Somebody cut it. But his mother, his Egyptian adopted mother, names him that. The Bible tells us that she named him that. There was a pagan god's name before it, and it's gone. So we have Moshe, which means from the God. That's what his name means, from. And in the Bible, it says, I drew you from the river, from the water. So his name was maybe after Tutmos or Sobek or one of the gods, one of the Egyptian gods of the Nile, of the water. We know it. I mean, we don't know for sure what it was, but we know it wasn't Moshe. Moshe was the most famous. That's Ramses. Moshe was what all these Egyptian pharaohs were named from the god Ra, who's their most important god. But again, there was also Tutmosis. There's so having a pagan god in our name is not necessarily, like that weird because there are other names like that. This one's interesting because it's so obvious. It's so obvious that her name was not a Jewish name. And it's a great name because it's a name that hides her identity perfectly, right? Give her the most Persian Gentile name that you can give because no one will ever assume she's Jewish with that kind of name. I tell people this, it's the equivalent of naming a kid Christine. I had a daughter and I named her Christine. No one would ever think she's Jewish. Her name's got Christ in it. I've just obscured her identity by giving her the most Gentile name possible. Mary's not a Gentile name. You'd think, oh, it's a Gentile name. It's Mary. Her name is Miriam. Mary is just a cognate, is just a form of Miriam. It's the name, it's a Hebrew name. Not, again, Esther has got a Persian goddess's name on there. And we're all cool with it. We don't have an issue with it. I don't have an issue with it, but that's where it came from. And, look, I told people I used to be embarrassed about my name is Mark because it's a Roman god of war. It's based on Mars. But I'm like, so what? My Hebrew name, Moshe, is based on another pagan god. The names got through and we recontextualized them. We understood them in a different way. Esther's name was the ultimate cover. And what's so cool about it is that the rabbis connected it to a Hebrew word, which is Hester. Hester is not the same origin of Ishtar. It's not like that's what her name means. Hester in Hebrew means hidden. That's what it means. Hidden. This story is the hidden story of hidden woman, the hidden name with a hidden God. And that's why we say this story is Hester Panim, God's hidden face. Yes, yes. Hadassah. Yes, Hadassah. Yeah. It's named after her. It's named after Esther's original Hebrew name. They intentionally called it Hadassah after Esther. 100%. Yeah. Hadassah organization. What? It's a funny movie that people never people never kind of grasp what they were doing with that, which was to make a road picture with Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman, and they really people really didn't know what to make of that movie. They couldn't. They yeah. If they understand it, if they can get it. Um, yeah, it's funny that that's one of the way it was considered one of the biggest box office bombs of all time because people just didn't know what to make of that, of having these actors doing a road picture. It's yeah, but if you loved road pictures and you saw what they were doing, so Esther becomes for the rabbis, it becomes can you do you understand what's happening here? Which is it's all hidden. All this stuff is hidden. And I always thought it was interesting because the Persian Jews were so good at kind of hiding their identity even into the modern era, where again they took completely Persian names and then they and what I found interesting was that when I started encountering Persian Jews in America, um, I I I noticed that a lot of the Persians were naming their kids names like Ryan and Samantha and like totally not no Hebrew at all, like completely Gentile, no biblical. I mean, like Christians would name their kids, Jacob or Michael. These people were coming up with the most non-Hebrew names, and I realized that they were just following kind of their tradition of having names, a name on the outside that was so unrecognizably Jewish that you wouldn't even, that you wouldn't even, you would never know. You wouldn't know. I mean, it's just an interesting kind of, uh-huh. Did he have another name? Did he have a Persian name? So, uh, yeah. Anyways, it seems like again, it's something that the Persians didn't want necessarily want to let go of, even when they came to America. This idea of having a Hebrew name and then a name that was so unrecognizably Jewish. And I mean, it goes back to Esther. I mean, I said so. This must be a conscious decision to continuously like, because there's no need to name your kid Ryan. You weren't naming them after any Persian name, and it wasn't like they were keeping a Persian name. So not like they called the kid Reza. They named the kid Ryan, and then his Hebrew name would be, would be Yaakov or something. It was just totally. Anyways, so I found it interesting that they continue that tradition even here when they got to America. Look, I mean, my family when they came here took completely non-Hebrew names. I mean, my dad's name was Philip. I mean, his mother's name was Bernice. I mean, her sister's name was Annetta and Renee. I mean, these were like the most Gentile names that you could get, and people did it. I mean, American Jews were doing it too, which was, I don't think they necessarily. And again, they had Hebrew names, but they obscure, they like They wanted to assimilate in a way so that when people saw their names, they wouldn't go, oh, they're Jewish. So, yeah, there's the name right there. In verse 7, we see what her name really was. So, what happens when she is called into the king's court?
When the king's order and edict was proclaimed, and when many girls were assembled in the fortress Shushan under the supervision of Haggai, Esther too was taken into the king's palace under the supervision of Haggai, guardian of the women.
Now, notice they're saying that this is the same as Haggai. This is supposed to, like maybe again, in the earlier place, it's written with an aleph, and here it's written with a yud, but we think it's the same guy. I don't know. Haggai. Um, Now it says she was taken. Now, that's an interesting question. Was she taken against her will or was she brought? It says she was taken. Yeah. The Hebrew word is lakach, which is taken. But we already saw the word lakach was used a couple of verses earlier when it says that Mordechai lakach took her as a daughter. So lakach isn't always necessarily forcible, but it could be. And so again, how you translate that word will tell you kind of where you thought that this maybe was voluntary or was it not voluntary. And that is important because if Esther willingly goes along with this, then to some extent, is she, I dare you going to say it, dare you say it, is she asking for the treatment that she gets? Or was she a victim? Or as we found in our own society, in our own days, sometimes it's a very fine line. But again, just tells you the way that's going to be translated was brought or was taken. Interesting difference in translation, my friends. Um, yeah. Yes. She wasn't in a relationship yet. Yep. Yes. That her honor was intact. Yeah, we're not 100% sure about that, by the way. We assume that she was. The story kind of says that she was, but we're not really 100% sure. There are readings, especially more modern readings of this, which is that Mordecai and her would maybe had not had a kid yet, but they could have had a kid. And that's part of the reading of this, which is, again, has other consequences to it, which is were Mordecai and Esther supposed to be husband and wife? Um, yeah, the rabbis have a real problem with this story because the consequences of this, they don't want it, they don't want to go down, which is, did a Jewish woman just get violated by, or is she about to get violated by a Persian, even though he's the king, right? So here's what happens.
The girl pleased him and won his favor, and he hastened to furnish her with her cosmetics and her rations, as well as with the 7 maids who were her due from the king's palace. And he treated her and her maids with special kindness in the harem.
Yeah, so that's the problem. From here to there, that's all it tells us. That's it. You have to be left to your imagination. Now, this isn't the end of the story, by the way. The story hasn't, I mean, there's some more of this that we read about. But somewhere between she's taken into to the palace and she pleased him and won his favor, something happened between there and there. What happened, again, to some extent, is open to your imagination, to your interpretation. But he liked her. He decides he's going to take care of her. He decides that she's going to have special treatment Did everyone make that cut? Well, let's see if we can figure it out by the words that come after.
Esther did not reveal her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had told her not to reveal it. Every single day, Mordecai would walk about in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was faring and what was happening to her.
Now, that seems to be a very protective father or somebody who is also perhaps jealous. Yeah. Somebody who is not feeling like this is a situation that should exist. Now, he told her not to reveal who she was. So he told her that. That's what the story tells us. It's not her idea necessarily to hide her identity. He told her to. And
When
by the way, hiding her identity might also not be telling him that we were supposed to be married or that we are married. And the rabbis even hinted that, by the way.
When each girl's turn came to go to King Ahasuerus at the end of 12 months' treatment prescribed for women, for that was the period spent on beautifying them, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and women's cosmetics. And it was after that that the girl would go to the king. Whatever she asked for would be given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. She would go in the evening and leave in the morning for a second harem in charge of Shaashgaz, the king's eunuch, guardian of the concubines. She would not go again to the king unless the king wanted her, when she would be summoned by name.
Yeah. So, according to this, she has to spend the next year kind of in seclusion. I mean, it seems fantastic and it seems,
It's like the Arabian Nights.
yeah, it seems it's those stories are based on the Persian court stories, the Arabian Night stories, but it doesn't seem like, I mean, obviously it establishes the fact that she can't see him whenever she wants. She's not even coming in that often, which either further illustrates how horrible this situation is, which is that this is a woman who should have been betrothed and should have been married to a Jewish man who never gets to do that. Or again, she's kept, even in the best situation, she's kept in seclusion for a year, not having any relations with anybody. Look, we don't know. When the king calls her in, assumedly she gets whatever she wants when she comes to him. Like this is your big day. How often did it happen? I don't know. It says it took a year for her to go through this process before she can even go. Pauline.
The women could not have been pregnant.
Very, very. Yeah. So Pauline says maybe this is a proof. The year was a proof that they were not impregnated by another man. Very possible. Yeah. It's very, yes, it's very possible. A year being in seclusion, not being around any other man who can impregnate her, would create a situation that, yeah, that there'd be no question that it was his child. It's possible. The rabbis agree with that. They're not 100% sure always that the seed can't last around longer, so they're not quite sure about that. But by the Persian calculation, they might have felt it was whatever. The point is that it is possible. Just the idea that she's not coming into physical contact with anybody for a year is insane. But that's what it just said. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Is she with other women? Is she with anybody else? It's possible. We think of it as a group that all the women are hanging out together. They're all in this amazing pool, this bathhouse where all the women were hanging out. That's kind of our version of it from the Ottoman Empire. We don't really know that the Persian harems were structured like that. It could be again that they never saw anybody else. They're almost in a prison. That's a possibility, at least a possibility when we see that he's walking around in front of where she's being kept, and it seems as though she's not at a party. It seems as though when he's walking around, right, he's walking around in front of the court trying to hear what's happening, what's going on with her. Um, it seems as almost it's more of a prison than it is, a beautiful bathhouse that they can, almost the assumption is there's actually, stuff going on between the women in the harem, right? There's physical connections and, relationships that were going on there. I mean, that's the, that's the graphic
Orientalist
pornography that,
fantasy.
yeah, that we, yeah, that has been laid on by generations of men imagining what this is like. But we don't know if it wasn't as much as a prison as anything else. Again, it's not like, she's not being treated, she's not being beaten in prison. She's having beauty treatments. But I mean, she's being kept potentially by herself with treatments, with beauty treatments every day. At a certain point, to me, that could be torture because you never get to do anything else. You're not doing anything else other than having stuff being put on your body. I mean, you know, this is what her life seems to be. That's all we get. We don't know. Maybe there is another life that she's living there. The rabbis never, well, the rabbis imagine that he can never do anything when he wants to be with her. Basically, God makes sure that he can't. Which, by the way, the consequence of that, all the consequence of that is that this woman never gets to actually have physical intimacy with anybody because God basically makes him, you know, in the rabbis' minds, he has erectile dysfunction every time he tries to come near her. He wants to, but he can't perform because the rabbis don't like the idea that a Persian king, even a Persian king, can violate a Jewish woman. They don't want it. They don't want to. They don't want that. That's not a happy ending for them, if you will, to use a pun, not an intended pun. That this is not their. This is not the way they want to see it happen. Even if she's treated as the queen, they don't like it. They don't want to. They don't want to. There's no way they can excuse this or allow this to happen. Now, because they don't have a kid, I'm not going to ruin the story for you. Because Ahasuerus and Esther never have a kid. It's a legitimate answer. I mean, it's an answer. It's a great answer, but it's a legitimate answer. So she gets whatever she wants. Uh, and here's what it says about. Here's what it says about it.
When the turn came for Esther, daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had adopted her as his own daughter, to go to the king, she did not ask for anything but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, guardian of the women, advised. Yet Esther won the admiration of all who saw her.
Yeah. So again, interestingly, here now it tells us who her father was, right? uh, Mordecai's uncle was named Avichail, which means my father is valiant, like Eshet Chayil, right? My father is valiant, is courageous. That's what her father's name was. So she doesn't ask for anything, unlike maybe some of the other women. She didn't ask for anything. And, or she didn't ask for anything except for what Haggai had told her to ask for. And it says she won the admiration of all who saw her. Now, we don't know how many people saw her. It could have been the eunuchs and the king. That could have been all who saw her. That's all the people we've heard that have seen her. But she's she's attracting attention because of her other qualities, right? Not just because she's beautiful, but because she seems to be smart and she is able to control herself, if you will. She's not asking for crazy stuff, assumedly, when she's going there. It's kind of what it says. So people are paying attention to her, if you will.
Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tevet, in the 7th year of his reign.
Yeah, and this is still going by the calendars that we have. Should put this. The dates are important in this because, of course, the date that is going to be established is the month of Adar, the month that we're going to celebrate Purim. So they're kind of giving you some dates now. They're starting to set it up for for this. By the way, we heard that he threw the party in the third year of his reign. The third year of his reign was when the party was. This is in the seventh year of his reign. So 4 years have passed by the time this stuff was happening. 4 years.
The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she won his grace and favor more than all the virgins. So he set a royal diadem on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti.
So this is the first time, right now, you just read that she's made queen. So sometime in the last 4 years, we don't know how long, we don't know how long after the beauty pageant was after that. We do know that there was a year that passed of the beauty treatments, but we don't know how long exactly she was brought into the court. But somewhere between 4 years and, you know, 3 years, 2 or 3 years, you know, that's how long she's already been there for before she's been made queen. I mean, probably not 4 years because it didn't happen the next day that they had the beauty pageant, but she's been there for about 3 years before she's made queen. 2 or 3 years. So
Hey, Mark,
that, yeah.
is there any kind of midrash on the fact that it says all the virgins and that she might not have been one?
Well, the Hebrew word that they use is betulot, right? So that is the word for that is the word for virgin. So like when we write a ketubah today, the word we use for virgin in Hebrew or in Aramaic is betula, betulta in Aramaic. So it's the Hebrew word for virgin. It's not the same word for young woman, which is interesting because, as we said, that's the words in Isaiah that get translated as the virgin will have a king, you know, a son. I mean, the virgin, the mistranslation of virgin is a mistranslation because the Hebrew word in Isaiah is not betula, it's almanah, which means or alma, which means a young woman. A young woman will have a child, which is again the translation for Jesus, but it's not a virgin. It's not the word betula. That's the word you use here is virgin. But
But do you see what I'm saying? That he loved her more than he loved the virgins, like as a group.
yeah, but the assumption there, Judith, the rabbis have assumed from that was that he picked her out at this point to be queen, that she still, at least this point, she was one of the virgins. They don't exclude her from the virgins, they include her as all the virgins. So they use this now. You could say
Just because going with
they
going
weren't virgins anymore, but they call them the virgins because they'd established that they were virgins in the first place, right? So the whole group of virgins that he brought, they're still calling them the virgins. Well, they look between you and I, we would call them that, and even we would call them that even when they weren't virgins anymore. But oh, you remember the big virgin thing that he did with all the virgins? People are still talking about it. They're still calling him the virgins. Now, the rabbis like to say she's still a virgin. They just called her a virgin with all the other virgins. But I mean, logic would tell you that he's had sex with all of them, and he's now decided which one is going to be the one that he likes the most, that he's going to make queen. And that's what it seemed. I mean, look, 100% possible. 100% possible that he hadn't had sex with any of them and was just waiting to pick out the right one. That's what the rabbis want you to believe. But I don't, it doesn't make sense. So, okay, the fact that they're still calling them the virgins, you interpret it, Judith, to mean that she's not a virgin anymore. All the other ones are not virgins anymore. I mean, all
Just
the
be,
other ones are. She's just not. She's not with them. I
right,
don't
because
know.
just because you said he never didn't, maybe I spaced and missed something, but didn't you say it's possible he never had relations with her?
Well, the rabbis want you to say he never had relations with her. This supports that. This
Okay.
supports it. I don't think that that's what the real meaning of it was. I think the meaning of it is, in a generic term, this was the women that he called. He liked her best out of all the women that he called forward. She was a part of the group of virgins. She's the one he liked the most. That's my plain understanding of it. Okay. I, the reason that he makes her queen now is because he likes her the most. It says he loved her, by the way. It does say he loved her. Vayehev. That's the word ahava. He loved her. And she had grace and favor, and and it says he took her in place of Vashti. So she became the queen instead of Vashti. That's what it says. She's not just the head virgin, she's not the head concubine, she's now queen. It took a few years, but she's now queen. That's what it says. However you interpret it, what else happened in the meantime, I think you can. And people have. And people have said she's no longer a virgin. She's still a virgin. I would have thought that he wouldn't have made sense that he wouldn't have slept with her before he made her the queen, but maybe he didn't. Point is, sets up another party. Another party.
The king gave a great banquet for all his officials and courtiers, the banquet of Esther. He proclaimed a remission of taxes for the provinces and distributed gifts, as befits a king. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai sat in the palace gate. But Esther still did not reveal her kindred or her people, as Mordecai had instructed her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai's bidding, as she had done when she was under his tutelage.
Yeah. Um, so Mordecai was there at the gate. It was there for the public, whatever the public got to see, he gets to see it. And it uses the word virgins again, when the virgins were assembled a second time. That's what it says. Now they say meaning of verse uncertain, probably because why would they have assembled everybody a second time there? But um, Esther is still not telling anybody where she came from, which again means that she's not telling people, like when people are saying, "You're the queen now. Where'd you come from?" She's not telling them. And did she make up a different backstory? Did she lie? Did she just say, "I don't want to talk about it"? It seems kind of wild. Like people want to know, right? There's got to be a story about her in People magazine. You got to know about her. She's our new queen, but she's still not telling anybody because she says Mordecai told her not to, and she hasn't given up that part. Now, of course, this is the rest of the story can only unfold if people don't know who she is. But she's not telling anybody at this stage, and she's now queen. So that's definitely unusual. It's something that she probably had a hard time with. And, you know, the 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 hiddenness of this is still, I mean, gosh, it's right. The hiddenness is right there for you all to see. And she's hiding herself.
Either if it was known she was Jewish, she would not be wanted. why would either because people don't like Jews, that, you know, and that's the point. I mean, it's definitely a, you don't hide.
Yeah, he does. So we don't know why, right? We don't know why Look, the answer is, of course, because Mordecai wants to protect her, right? He doesn't feel there's any benefit to people knowing, or yeah, because it might not be safe for her. Now what we'll find out is that because she was hidden, it seems as though that's how she was able to do what she did. None of it could have happened if she hadn't been hidden. So I mean, I don't want to ruin the end of the story. You know the end of the story, but part of this doesn't work unless she's hidden. I mean, obviously it doesn't. Well, how would it have played out if everyone knew? Could Haman have ever done what he did? So what's interesting about this, of course, is that this only works if she's hidden. If people don't know that she's there, if you will, as a spy, right? If she's not there, she can't do what she needs to do. So does Mordecai also, the rabbis like to think, feel that this is going to allow for this to happen? Does Mordecai know something that we don't know, which is that this kind of stuff that could happen? Or did he just think whatever happens, it's better for people not to know? Number one, because it could cause a problem. But number two, if we ever need to let this play out, we have a mole, if you will, in the White House, right? So this is kind of the you know the clandestine kind of like, if we can get somebody in here, we can infiltrate the Persian kingdom, then whenever we need that help, we could have it. I mean, it's a possibility, folks. I mean, that's at least a possibility of what's going on here. And again, it could be we don't want any anti-Semitism, but it could also be, look, there's no upside for it. I tell people all the time, you don't have to lie to people, but you don't have to tell people everything. Sometimes not telling everybody everything will help you down the road. Because if people don't expect you, like everyone wants to brag about everything that they know. And so or everything that they've done. And so once they actually are able to use that, in the best case scenario, people go, well, yeah, that's because you knew that already. But man, if you don't tell people, oh, I happen to know how to do that. Then when you actually get to do it, you're actually the hero. People don't go, oh, yeah, this guy's, of course he knows how to do that. He's, that's where he was trained. It's like, the person who you go like, oh my gosh, that person's a fantastic dancer or fantastic singer. Well, you didn't tell everybody that you went to Juilliard, right? And so then they're surprised by it. They're amazed by your talent. But if you go around telling everybody where you went to school, then people aren't, they're like, of course. So there's an advantage for not telling everybody everything about you, which I think is an interesting lesson for today. But again, this was a whole nother, for Esther, again, it could have been saving her life. We don't know. It definitely does without ruining the end of the story, but she's still not telling anybody. So here we go. And this is the part that we're going to finish with today, the setup for the part that everyone forgets. This is the setup for how everything plays out and is able to be the story that we know. And whenever you see a phrase like this, you know something weird is going to happen. Here's the phrase.
At that time, when Mordecai was sitting in the palace gate, Bigtan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and plotted to do away with King Ahasuerus.
And that's the phrase right here. And the rabbis know it, and we know it, and everybody knows it. Whenever the translation doesn't really convey it, but we know in Hebrew, whenever we see the words bayamim hahem, and at that time or in those days, on that day. So whenever you see that phrase, something big is about to happen. It doesn't just say, and Mordecai was sitting by the gate and heard this stuff. Could have said that. Could have said that. It could be a new chapter, whatever. It could be a paragraph. Doesn't matter. Doesn't say that. Something big just happened. And that is that Mordecai heard about a assassination plot. Right? Now, Why does it say plotted to do away with? Because it says lishloach yad, that they're gonna. King James Mary says, yeah, to lay hands on, because the word yad means hand, right? They're doing something to get rid of this guy. Why? Doesn't say. It doesn't say what Bigtan and Teresh's issues are. They're eunuchs, right? They're in the court. They're two of those people that are in the inner court, if you will, two of the people that are in the inner court. And it says they wanted to get rid of them. It just says that they're angry and they want to, yeah, they want to get rid of them. So Mordecai happens to be at the right place at the right time.
Mordecai learned of it and told it to Queen Esther, and Esther reported it to the king in Mordecai's name. The matter was investigated and found to be so, and the two were impaled on sticks. This was recorded in the book of Annals at the instance of the king.
Yep. So they find out the plot. Mordecai gets the word, by the way, to Esther. But it says that it was reported that Mordecai heard it. So even though Esther, is the one who brings it to his attention, it's Mordecai who gets credit for it. And Mordecai is recognized as being the person who was able to inform on them. Again, he's at the right place at the right time. He overhears this stuff. He's able to pass it on, and they kill these guys. So this becomes critical for the story later, right? This becomes the setup for how the plot is stopped. Now, this just tells us in the first two chapters the setup for how we get to this guy right here, because it's not until the beginning of chapter 3 that we're introduced to that guy, to Haman. Now, boo, you got your boo in there. So he's not there for the first two chapters, which is interesting because, again, oftentimes when you're setting up a good villain, sometimes you start with that.
Yeah.
You'll do the backstory of the villain right away so that you can build up
The first thing that happens in Star Wars is Darth Vader strangles somebody.
correct. You got to know how bad you're dealing with this. But they chose not to, right? They chose to introduce him in the third. Though the rabbis like to say he was there all along. He just had a different name. Sometimes they say his name used to be Memucan before it got changed to Haman. Again, it's a possibility. It's also a possibility that this guy now is the guy in charge. That he now has the young up and comer who just passed by all those guys. Or maybe Memucan was his father. I mean, it doesn't say that because his father is named Hamadata. So, but the rabbis can say somebody's name got changed, that, and there are people whose names get changed, like Hadassah. So it's possible that people's names got changed. But all we know about him so far is we're going to see, we haven't seen him at all in the first two chapters. He's not part of the Vashti incident. He's not part of the let's find a new queen incident. He has now come on the scene. And the rabbis, because of the juxtaposition of the plot to kill, was that there was a purge after this. It wasn't just those two guys that got killed. Other people got killed because there was a coup attempt. And so, Ahasuerus has to get rid of a lot of people. So it makes sense now that Haman is going to get in there. The rabbis also like a possibility, and it's been hinted at in some of the more recent adaptations of this, that Haman is actually behind the plot. It's just when those guys get caught, he's now the guy that asserts himself in the inner court that's the really bad guy. He's really the bad guy who was kind of about with this plot. But now he's the guy there. So they kind of like that idea that Haman is part of the conspirators against Ahasuerus. But the juxtaposition is obviously significant in the rabbinic mind, that these two things are not, they're not a coincidence. Of course, at the very least, Mordecai is going to get into the court through this because of this information that he gives, just as the same time as Haman is coming up. And so the very least, the rabbis point out that Haman and Mordecai are bound together because they both come up, they both are making their entree kind of into the court at the same time. Haman in a very obvious way, and Mordecai now in this kind of hidden way. This was the opening. And, you know, the rabbis always like to point out, and other people point out, that people are connected to the villain, right? The villain and the hero are connected. Sometimes they're connected, they're related. Sometimes they're connected because they have a common origin, you know, that some action happened and created two different effects, right? But that they're connected by the same, you know, they came out of the same environment, right? That one person went one way with this stuff and one person went the other way. So it's a narrative style that, you know, that you know, a device that people use, and it's successful. But this story is now going to go in. We're going to have these stories run parallel to each other: the ascension of Mordecai and the ascension of Haman, and the fact that Esther is there behind both, and she's the way that this dance between these two guys is choreographed. She's the one who's trying to change the music. So it's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful setup. And it's one that, again, most of us don't read or understand in its full complexity because we're reading it so fast. And we're supposed to be drinking when we're reading it. We're supposed to be making noise. We're supposed to be having a great time. But the story is obviously a lot more complex. So next week, when we come back, and we'll be back next week, we're going to read the chapters that deal with chapters 3, 4, and 5 that deal with the actual take us right to the end of the last scene, which is the party scene. And all of these, again, all of these scenes, all of these incidents are always capped with a good party. So we should definitely, well, if we're not drink, we should definitely be celebrating life. But you'll see how quickly this stuff unfolds in the next few chapters. It happened real quick. Chapter 3 is the where it all really, that's where the flip is. That's where the fulcrum is, where you're suddenly on the other side. So we'll take a look. And it happens, like I said, it happens fast.
Plot
Well,
point one.
yeah, don't go anywhere. This is not really the cliffhanger, but
Right.
it's that's it up. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Rosemary. Thanks, everybody,
Thank
for
you.
being here. And thank you, everybody who joined us also in person online
Thank you, Rabbi.
on the ships at sea. All right. Take care, everybody.
Right,
Bye.
right.